Welcome to the Korea Pro podcast. I'm your host, Jeongmin Kim, the editorial director of Korea Pro.
And I'm John Lee, the editor of Korea Pro.
Join us for a weekly 15-minute conversation as we dive into the most pressing stories shaping South Korea and dissect the most complicated ones for you.
From politics to culture, technology to society, we've got you covered. So stay ahead of the curve and never be sidelined again.
So get ready for a fresh perspective on South Korea's news. This is the Korea Pro podcast. Welcome back to the Korea Pro podcast. Today is Thursday, September 12, a little over 4 p.m. This week, it was a very busy defense and security week. And we started off with REAIM, the summit, the high-level discussion for 2 days about responsible use of AIs in military. So what was this exactly about, the summit?
Well, just as the name suggests, it's about the responsible use of AI in the military domain.
It's a pretty cool name, REAIM.
It is. But unfortunately, it was a bit of a nothing burger summit.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, they all said, okay, yes, we should be responsible and we should eventually maintain human control of military weapons, even if we do use AI. But this was expected. No one was going to say, let's just hand the keys over to AI and let them take care of everything. But the disappointing thing was that there was no specifics given as to what kind of programs that they're going to use, as to what kind of a intranational organization would oversee whether or not something might be a violation of the Geneva Conventions, or even if the Geneva Conventions might need to be updated because of all these new weaponry and computer systems that are being used. It was very substance-free.
Right. But it's only a second one. And to be fair, it takes more than a couple meetings, the annual meetings, for the participants to actually come up with something serious, or after seeing serious incidents, probably. But aside from the summit itself, Junha, our correspondent, he just wrote this analysis about what actually has to be discussed in this sector, the responsible use of AI in military. So what are some of the main controversies or debate points that we saw so far?
Well, in Junha's piece, which was just published 15 minutes ago, by the way, and if you want to know more, subscribe. What Junha was essentially pointing out was South Korea is at the forefront of adopting AI, and that's because of our aging population. The South Korean military, I'm not sure if you've read the past few defense white papers, but they've always maintained that they are going to keep the 500,000 force numbers intact. But that's just physically not possible.
That's just impossible.
There are no young people to replace all of those numbers. And so the only other way forward is to adopt more AI technology. And so they are trying to adopt more of this technology in order to, especially to safeguard the border, the DMZ. And so that's the rationale behind it. But the problem lies in the practicality of this AI system. For example, apparently there's an AI system called Lavender, which is being used by the Israeli Defense Forces currently, right now, in Gaza, in their war against Hamas. But as we've also seen in the news, there have also been a lot of civilian casualties. And so some experts have been pointing out that, yes, AI has made things a lot more efficient and allowed choices to be made quickly, but what are the ethics behind it? And so this is the sort of thing eventually where REAIM did not discuss this in detail, but eventually, not just REAIM, but I'm sure that the UN is also going to get involved to actually talk about this in much greater detail in the coming years and decades.
It seemed like in the past few years, it sort of started off with the U.S. assets or potential assets. The debate was, how far should the AI be allowed? Can it make command and control sort of responsibilities? Should it be tasked with that, or should it just assist the human decisions? And if the latter, how actually useful is it in replacing human personnel?
Well, when it comes to command and control, it is unanimous that no one is saying that should be handed over to the AI, that it should always be the person who makes the ultimate decision. But how does it really help? It's a personnel issue. Again, some of the experts in Junha's piece were saying that with the use of AI, instead of relying on 500 soldiers, now the army can rely on 100 soldiers. And so this is going to help to really restructure the way forces are deployed, and also help governments save a lot of money as well.
Right, but that's also a very ideal type of scenario, right? Because even if there are AIs, if they're just assisting the decisions, for instance, let's talk about real life examples. If there are drones coming in, for instance, and the AIs are helping out, the radars, for instance, and figuring out what's the bird and what's the balloon and what's the drone, don't human beings still have to make the final decision to shoot something down?
Yes, that will eventually come down to the pilot's decision.
Right.
The
So
commander's decision.
how does that help with the declining population?
With the declining population.
I mean, for the military.
Well, for the military, it still comes down to how many people are going to be able to sit down at the computer to make those final decisions. But because South Korea especially has such a shrinking population, the number of soldiers who can actually sit down at that table in front of the computer is getting smaller. But because AI is going to help in ideally be able to differentiate what's a flock of birds and what's an incoming missile, then the number of people who are still required to sit at the table, they're still going to be able to do that because the computers will handle all the manual tasks.
I see. So basically making the information gathering part a bit more efficient, I guess.
Ideally, that's what they're hoping for.
Okay, just to play devil's advocate just a little bit as well. You talked about the border, but South Korean military is not just about the border. There are a lot of asymmetric threats. There is a lot of new types of asymmetric threats, especially from North Korea. So these days, it's not just about the border, but core military facilities. And there has been some discussion that we have too many soldiers anyways at the border and they should be relocated. And can the AI help with that? Let's move on to business and social issues. There was this very interesting and potentially concerning new announcement. Was this from the government?
So it's quite odd that this very important story came out on Thursday, just as the weekend, the long Chuseok holiday is just coming up. But what happened was that there's been a new enforcement decree that's going to allow businesses to collect personal information needed for services, but without actually getting explicit user consent.
At first, I thought I read it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But this means that basically companies can get your information without your consent, without the checkmark.
So, for example, anytime I want to do some online shopping, or if I want to buy a movie ticket, I'll always need to check on this particular check mark that says I consent to having my information shared.
Like my phone number.
Or whatever for marketing purposes or whatever. I need to check it. If I don't check it, I can't buy whatever I'm trying to buy or something like that.
I mean, it's usually not about the marketing part. Like, do you agree?
Sure. Do you consent to this information being shared?
Mm.
And for a lot of people, we don't really think about all that much. We just click on the check button and we just buy whatever we want to buy.
Mm.
But now that check mark is not even going to be there anymore. Now now those businesses will just be able to collect that data without us checking that.
Right.
It no longer needs a consent.
So we need more time to look into this because we're seeing bare minimum level of information so far. But just to go into the rationale of why the companies probably wanted this and the 개인정보, the committee agreed to go along, it seems like the companies were expressing concerns about too much responsibility and accountability on the company side after they get the consent about the private information that they get, because they have to store it for a certain amount of time. And if it gets leaked and used in a way that they never expected, they have to be responsible, which I imagine it should be their responsibility because they get the information. But anyways, there are some caveats in this decree, though. First thing is it has to be related to something directly related to service operations that the service user has already agreed to make use of. For instance, if you are, like you mentioned, if you're using an online shopping mall and ordering something, for instance, your home address is a private information that is required from the company for the company to have in order to send the goods to your place.
They'll need my address to deliver it.
Right. So for that, the check mark for consent will be gone.
Right. And of course, it's not just online shopping malls. It's also whenever you want to buy plane tickets. Whenever you go online to book a plane ticket, these airline companies will be able to collect your passport numbers. And those are the kinds of data that they're going to collect. But here's where I'm a little bit, where my spidey senses are tingling a little bit. And that's when they say that they still need to get our explicit consent if that data is considered to be sensitive data.
Or it's more like they have to prove to the government that it is the necessary information for operation, but that's very, very vague.
What is the criteria for something to be considered sensitive data? For example, we just talked about our passport numbers, our home addresses. That is also sensitive data, but how is that going to be interpreted legally?
That I always thought it was weird. Sometimes companies ask you to email your passport numbers or driver's license when there are car rental companies. I always feel very uncomfortable when I'm asked to provide that number in full.
And it's not just that, it's when you also apply for jobs. In the past, you had to write down your entire
Social security number. They still do that.
Not anymore.
And for like gig workers to get the compensation, they're sometimes asked to just.
Well, the law has changed where now you only need to write the first 6 digits of your number, which is your birth date, but not the last few digits.
Right.
But now, is that also going to be considered as sensitive data? Or no, what is or what isn't sensitive data? They never really went through any of this information. And so, like we said earlier, just before we began this segment, it's Thursday, the long holiday weekend is coming up, and there's a very good chance that this information was brought up today because someone's trying to bury this information, but you can rely on us to keep digging into this.
Right, and it's kind of concerning that when the government announced this, they only mentioned that we will discuss this thoroughly with the industries, and they did not mention public sentiment or to review what the social consensus about this is. So, yeah, we'll keep an eye on this. Last topic, economy. The national health insurance premiums frozen for the second year.
Which is quite unprecedented. National health insurance premiums have always gone up a little bit every year, but not for next year. This year, the interest rate is slightly above 7%, 7.09%, and the government announced that it's going to remain at 7.09 for 2025 as well.
So this is for financial relief in general that they have been aiming at with other agenda.
Well, I'm not sure if it's for financial relief personally. I think it's all about politics. Because we have to remember that before this announcement was made, the government also said that they're going to have pension reforms, and there's going to be a lot of people are going to be paying more for their pensions every year. It's going to go up every single year. At, of course, slightly different rates for different age groups. But because of that pension rate that is going up, if the health insurance rate also goes up at the same time, that's a lot of taxes that are going to go up for a lot of people. Eventually, all of this starts to stack up. And so my suspicion is that the government said, all right, because we already pushed for pension reforms, let's keep the national health insurance premium at where it is for the time being. All right, and the last topic for today, we are going to be talking about how the FSS, that's the Financial Supervisory Service, which is South Korea's financial watchdog, it made an announcement on Wednesday saying that they're going to tighten the grip on what they called quote-unquote illegal moneylenders. Now, when we are thinking of illegal moneylenders, of course, we are thinking of, loan sharks, essentially. And
so, in Korean.
And so they're going to reclassify them as illegal credit businesses.
So how is that different?
In the past, they used to be called unregistered credit businesses. But because of but now they're going to replace the word unregistered with illegal, making it very much explicit that they are operating outside of the law.
But the target of the category is the same? Unregistered are equal
They
illegal.
are now illegal.
Okay.
And so this is going to make it very explicit that these moneylenders, typically the kind of people that we see in movies and TV shows, the loan sharks, those with the very colorful shirts, and who now in movies and TV shows, we
sleeves
might
up,
them,
right?
Yeah, we might depict them that way, but in real life, these can be very predatory people. Their interest rates whenever they hand out loans can range up to 3,000 to 5,000% interest,
and they're everywhere, actually.
And they are everywhere. I'm sure that people have seen those
cards
business
and banners,
cards that are sprayed around everywhere. And so the government is going after these organizations. And so for a lot of people, we might think, yes, they are predatory. They are people who target the most vulnerable, and therefore they should be made illegal. But at the same time, we also have to take into consideration market realities. No sane person goes to a loan shark to take out a 5,000% interest loan because they have so many other options. Most of these people are people who have gone bankrupt, who have poor credit scores, or who for some reason or another cannot access money from banks or even, private money lenders. And so they have no choice but to go to these people. But if these rapacious loan sharks are controlled even more or broken up or sent to prison, yes, it might feel good for a lot of people, but for the people who actually do need them, as desperate as that may be, it might put them in an even more worse spot.
Now, this kind of sounds similar to the dilemma that we saw with Banjiha, the what's it called,
The basement apartments.
Basement apartments, when there were flooding in some of the Seoul basement apartments, some of the families died, and then Seoul Metropolitan Office, they started talking about getting rid of them and making all of them illegal.
Banning all basement apartments instead of, trying to improve the sewage system.
Right, but some people need it, right?
Some people who do not have the money to actually afford, villas or apartments, they have to go to those places.
Right. When it comes to the consumers of illegal credit businesses, now that it's called that way, what are some of the alternatives that the government is suggesting?
Well, that's the thing. They didn't really. They just said that they're going to make these particular lenders illegal credit businesses. But, in order to do that, you will need to assure people that they have other options. But those additional options were not mentioned.
We will keep an eye on whether or not they will follow up with any alternative options in the coming weeks.
In South Korea's fast-paced professional environment, staying informed is key to success. With a Korea Pro subscription, you get access to daily email newsletters, expert briefings, and exclusive events that help you stay ahead. As a podcast listener, you can now try Korea Pro for free and subscribe at a discounted rate if you like what we're doing. Visit koreapro.org/podcast to subscribe and get everything you need to stay on top in South Korea. Korea Pro, never be sidelined again.
Week ahead, we have a very big announcement coming on the States side. Is it Wednesday local time?
Wednesday, September 18th, that's when the Federal Reserve is going to have their meeting to discuss whether or not they're going to cut their interest rates. There has been a lot of anticipation over the past few weeks and months that the Fed will finally cut interest rates. The numbers being tossed around is 25 basis points. But whether or not that's actually going to do that is up in the air right now.
And some people were saying even 50. I doubt that. But
50 is way too excessive.
Yeah.
25 basis points, maybe. But even then, we have to see if it will actually do that, because if we looked at the recent U.S. inflation numbers, they have not been slowing down as fast as the Fed had hoped. And so there are some people who are now taking a step back, thinking maybe they might not actually change the interest rates. But regardless of what the decision is, that will have a follow-up effect in South Korea, because in South Korea, the BOK is going to have their meeting in October.
October 11th, Friday. Last time they froze.
Right, October 11th. Now, they're probably going to have to make a decision as to whether or not they're going to cut rates or not. The government really wants the Bank of Korea to cut interest rates. But so far, the BOK has been very conservative. It has maintained its 3.5% interest rate. And it might still do that going forward because of household debts.
It actually increased in the past quarter. New data also shows as well.
Right.
Week ahead also, we haven't discussed this for a while, but doctor strike related issues.
Right. It's been going on for 7-8 months now, this strike, and it has had a cumulative effect. Over 40% of ER doctors are no longer in the hospitals. I
did experience this twice, actually, in the past few months. Unfortunately, when I went to the ER, there was no doctors.
Right. And, people get into accidents, people die, people get sick, but because of this doctor shortage, people are being turned away from hospitals. We have read horrific news reports about how some hospitals turned away patients who were coming through ambulances, and the ambulance kept on going around, eventually with the patient dying in the car.
Yeah, like people with strokes and everything, right?
Exactly. This is turning out into a gigantic mess.
So keep an eye on it. There might be more additional announcements. Lastly, Iraq expected to conclude a deal with South Korea about some sort of system that they're trying to buy. This was reportedly, though.
This was reported by Iraqi media, which was later on then picked up by South Korean media. So we're not sure if it will actually happen. But according to news media reports, the Iraqi government is now considering buying South Korea's Cheongmin-2 missiles for about $2.5 billion.
Isn't this kind of awkward to see in the Middle East? Because other countries have been buying similar systems as well.
You're absolutely right. Iraq is now the latest Middle Eastern country to buy South Korean weapons. First, it was Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and now Iraq. And of course, a lot of these countries are kind of worried about the military buildup that's going on in the region. They're worried about Iran. And so South Korea can expect more Middle Eastern countries to show interest in South Korean weapon systems.
Are there any possibilities that ultimately one day there would be South Korean missiles fighting South Korean missiles somewhere?
It is not entirely impossible, but, let's hope that day never comes. And of course, Jeongmin is going to send you all of this week ahead information into your email inboxes next week. Now, we have to remind you that next week is the Chuseok holidays.
Right. Happy Chuseok. But compared to other weeks, the week ahead might be slightly lighter than usual.
Every government agency is going to take those 3 days off, Monday through Wednesday. So the week ahead newsletter might be a little thin, but we are going to try to come up with as much information for you as possible. So if you'd like to read more, please subscribe.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why they matter every morning in your inboxes.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for your weekly dose of insight. And until next time, I'm Jeongmin Kim.
And I'm John Lane. Stay connected, stay informed, and we'll see you next time on the Career Pro Podcast.